Hello students, welcome to Legacy IAS Academy. In this particular video, we are going to discuss about a recent meeting that concluded between President of US Donald Trump and the Russian President Vladimir Putin in the Alaska region of USA. As you know that Alaska is the 50th state of US. Now, apart from US, Russia, Ukraine and countries all across the world, India was also looking at this particular meeting with a lot of interest. The reason is because we know that Donald Trump has decided to apply secondary, we can call as tariff on India, that is levied at the rate of 25%, because India is buying Russian oil since last 2-3 years continuously. So, as we know that the meeting has concluded without any particular deal as such, it has not yielded any fruit as India was expecting, and thus it makes it very difficult for India, and basically it presents India with a lot of tough choices that how it is going to handle its bilateral relationship, especially trade relationships with US, and also at the same time balance its energy interest without compromising the cheaper Russian oil that has flowed into the Indian territory to the Indian petroleum refiners as such. Now, to understand the context of this particular topic, we know that India with a great interest was looking at and counting on a clear and positive outcome from the Alaska summit, because there was a hope that if Alaska summit becomes successful, if some kind of deal can be signed between US and Russia as far as the Ukraine war is concerned, in that case India might be able to avert this additional 25% that is levied by Trump administration and is going to take into effect from the 27th of August. To just around 11-12 days are left. However, it has not delivered because the summit has failed in one way we can say, and at least by the last night, 15th August is when the summit has taken place. If we look at this particular summit, India has not got any kind of clear signal as such. The failure to reach an agreement leaves a dark cloud of uncertainty about the policy. We can say that government has to now formulate, especially in the context of buying and importing oil, and also India's trade negotiation with US and Washington. As you know that from past couple of months, especially after Trump has announced reciprocal tariff, India is trying to find some sort of solution by signing a bilateral trade agreement with US. Now, if we try to understand first of all the brief background of the Alaska summit. Alaska summit took place between the two leaders of the countries US and Russia. As we have discussed, it was the meeting that took place between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, and the main goal, main objective of this meeting was to reach some sort of ceasefire negotiation if possible, or to move forward on the path of peace as well as the war in Ukraine is concerned. At the same time, India was hopeful that any positive signal that might come from this particular meeting might help it to avert the tariff, and also it might be able to pursue Trump to also reduce the tariff rates that it has that they have imposed earlier on India. Because if you try to understand, 25% of tariff already was imposed on India, and then further additional 25% of tariff was imposed on the ground that India has been buying Russian oil, and in this way is funding the Russian war machine as such. However, as we know that no final deal has reached, and that is why the uncertainty as far as India's diplomatic what you can call as possibilities are concerned looms still. Now, if you try to understand about the statement that come from the Trump-Putin summit in Alaska, we have to look at the phrase that is being used by both of the leaders. So, first of all, if you take a look at the Vladimir Putin's statement, he has clarified that for him it is an important agreement. At the same time, Trump also has agreed that they have made a considerable progress, though as far as the Ukraine war is concerned, there has been a sticking point. This war basically is a sticking point between both Russia and US, but apart from that, both leaders have agreed that they have reached to some sort of considerable progress as far as the bilateral relation between US and Russia is concerned. However, as far as the war is concerned, there is no concrete settlement. And overall, from this meeting, many of the experts have argued that from early it also was believed that the war solution to the Russia-Ukraine war cannot be arrived with a single meeting. So, a step has been taken in that direction, and that is why there is a lot of optimism. But as far as the clarity is concerned, still it is lacking or missing as such. Now, interesting thing to note here is that during the summit, both leaders, Putin and Donald Trump, has taken a step forward or moved in a way to increase the overall what you can call a decrease overall the tension that we have seen persisting between US and Russia from last couple of years. And in this context, Putin also has tried to evoke a sense of cooperation between Russia and US by talking about the wartime cooperation that we saw between Soviet Union and United States of America during the World War II. As you know that during the World War II, both countries were part of the allied nations, allied power, and US has supported Soviet Union to a great extent in winning a war, or what you can call as carrying out a counter-attack against the German offensive as such. And in this context, we have to understand that as far as the Putin's statement is concerned, it seems he was more focused on improving relations with US rather than focusing upon the in ending the Ukraine war or concluding or reaching to some sort of ceasefire agreement as such. That has been his overall emphasis. Now, as far as the Ukraine stance is concerned, in this meeting, one thing is clear, that Russian President Vladimir Putin has stated that his stance on Ukraine is same, and it will not change unless and until the problem that Russia considered the problem that that has led to the development of war in Ukraine, unless and until that problem is not solved. And that basically means that there should be a guarantee that Ukraine will never be included in the NATO, will never get a membership of NATO alliance as such. And overall, they have focused on potential trade and its strategic scope also to increase between Russia and USA. Now, Trump also has sought breakthrough, and he has stated that there is no deal until a deal is reached, talking about the Russia-Ukraine war again. Now, if we try to understand here, first of all, why Trump is so much concerned about this statement at this particular meeting is because it is believed by scholars that he has invested a lot of political capital as far as meeting with President Putin is concerned. Because if you look at the previous administration, especially after war began between Russia and Ukraine, we have seen during the Biden's presidency, he has taken a firm stance that Vladimir Putin, he cannot and he would not meet with President Putin unless and until he agrees to end the war in Ukraine as such. So after Trump came into power, he has already indicated that he is willing to meet with Putin to end the Russia-Ukraine war, to bring the both countries to some sort of ceasefire. So in this direction, he has met the progress. Now, obviously, despite investing so much political capital, despite inviting President Putin to US American soil, it seems that there has been also internal division in the US, and not only in the US, but even in the Republican Party. The party that Trump represents, it seems that it is divided on how to handle Russia, how to handle Putin as such. Because you have an anti-war faction and you also have pro-war faction. Pro-war faction basically you can say is a pro-Ukraine and Ukrainian lobby we can say that is present within the Republican Party. For example, one of the most important senator from Republican Party called as Lindsey Graham even has proposed a bill in the US Congress where he is trying to levy at least almost 500% of tariff on those countries who are directly or indirectly supporting the Russia and such. Also, if you try to understand that there has been concern among the European countries as well, especially the major powers such as Netherlands, France, Germany and all that, and they were worried that maybe such kind of meeting would lead to bifurcation or overall territorial concessions. Basically from the Ukraine side to Russia to appease Putin as such, but again that has not happened in this particular meeting at least. So there was a general fear basically between the political parties and the political representatives of US as well as among the European members and European government that any kind of territorial concessions might be seen as rewarding aggression as such, because Russia was the one who has invaded, which has invaded Ukraine, which has gained and captured a large territory of Ukraine, and thus any kind of territorial concession would be seen to be rewarding such kind of aggression as such. And that is why both European members as well as some of the politicians from US themselves were pushing for a balanced settlement. However, again, as we have discussed, that deal has not been reached as now. Now, as far as the India's immediate concern is there, the first concern as we have discussed and the foremost concern actually is the tariff threat. As we have discussed, US has levied an additional tariff of 25% which is going to kick in on 27th of August. And now it seems that there is not a lot of time and nothing significant can be done in this particular time period to ensure that such kind of tariff is not applied here. And overall, this entire tariff threat was linked to the Ukraine strategy as far as the Trump's administration is concerned, because again, the logic behind this tariff was to punish any countries which are significant, which are having significant trade ties with Russia, which are importing a lot of Russian commodities, especially crude oil and natural gas, because Washington believed that such kind of import is funding Russian war, and that is why Russia is not willing to have any kind of negotiation, settlement or even end the war as such. So this was nothing, or this is nothing but an example of pressure tactics on the countries such as India. But again here interestingly, if you see, Washington has taken a completely different stance as far as China is concerned, because as far as the imposition of tariff on China is concerned, US has decided to delay it at least by the November 2025, but India is being treated unfairly here. That is what we have to understand. The focus obviously is the Russian oil imports, and such kind of diplomatic situation, such kind of uncertainty is something that New Delhi does not want, and it has to, however, tackle this. Now, if you try to understand about the oil import, as we can see that when we are talking about the double standards by the US, as I told you that US if you talk about the oil import from Russia, we can see that in 22, 23, 24, the largest amount of oil that was imported from Russia was by China. If you look here, China has imported roughly 40 to 45% of Russian oil. On the other hand, you can see the share of India has been relatively less. It has imported somewhere between 30 to 35% of Russian oil as such. Despite this, China is being given concession, despite US considering China as a competitor or a rival countries. At the same time, when US talks about India as its strategic partner, it's a strong ally as far as the Indo-Pacific region is concerned, but here India is being treated unfairly by imposition of 25% of additional tariff as such. Now, US argument on tariff is simple. They have stated that they are targeting big oil importers and thus by putting additional revenue, it will be able to cut Moscow's revenue. Now, interestingly, many scholars and experts also argue that one of the reasons why Putin might have decided to meet with Trump finally, earlier he was shying away from doing that, is because of the additional tariff being imposed on India as such, and that might have caused worry in Kremlin also, because they feel that their major partners, major trade partners might now get might now not be able to import that much oil as before, and that is why it might have influenced him to meet Trump. Push compromise, basically the entire region was to push compromise as far as the Ukraine war is concerned, and obviously any additional tariff will have a direct impact on India's trade, because as we know today, if we talk about the bilateral trade, India is the largest trading partner. US is the largest trading partner of India, where the trade value goes as high as about $100 billion and even beyond that. And overall, it will have indirect impact on the global oil market, because Russia is the largest, one of the largest producer of oil and gas in the world. And if India, China, for example, suppose theoretically stop purchasing oil from Russia, in that case, the global oil prices will rise significantly, and that will not only impact the growth, economic growth and GDP growth of India, but it will overall cut down the global GDP growth as well. And especially here, effect will be seen on the European countries, because if you look at the overall energy market, India obviously was importing large amount of crude oil from Russia, but a majority of this, after being refined in the Indian refineries, was being exported to European Union. In other way, what we can understand, that earlier Europe used to directly buy Russian oil, now it is also buying the petroleum products, but indirectly from India as such, indirectly by Russia, India as such. So this is how we have to understand that the global diplomacy or global policies work. Now, if we try to understand that what has been the general this message coming from the Trump administration. So if we talk about the US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he has clearly given indication that in the future even higher tariff or additional tariff is possible if countries who are importing oil from Russia do not decrease the amount as such. Not only that, as we have discussed that India was selling its refined product to European Union, Scott Bessent also has asked the European partners to join the additional tariff and sanctions and do not purchase any oil from such countries which have imported it from Russia as such. Overall, it will also apply pressure on the refined importers, and it seems that the threat of sanctions is growing with every passing day as such. Now, at the same time, I told you that many senators of US have put a bill under debate in the US Congress, both in the Senate as well as House of Representatives, which can authorize, President of US will be then authorized to levy up to 500% tariff on the trade partners of US if they do not comply with the sanctions or do not comply by reducing the volume of oil flowing into these territories as such. Overall, on any significant Russian economic partner, such sanctions, such additional tariff can be levied, and it carries also a higher risk for India as such. Now, if we try to understand that what is the implications for India. So, since India began to buy Russian oil, especially after the Russian invasion in 2022, if we try to understand India's interest both in the context of India-US relationship as well as Indo-Russia relationship, to a large extent has been bound to the Ukrainian geopolitics. So the end of Ukraine war or how this entire situation unfold carry a heavy weight or huge weight for India's diplomacy. Now, oil reliance also complicate the policy measures that India can take, because we know that India does not have a significant domestic reserve, and for almost 80% of its oil and gas demand, it is depending on import, and in recent years about 30 to 35%, in some years even it has went to 38%. That amount of oil has come from Russia, because obviously Russian oil was available in the global market at a much more discounted prices. So India will have to weigh the cost of the tariff, additional tariff that US has imposed, and an additional tariff that it may impose in the future as well against the energy security, which is vital for the growth and the economy of India as such. So obviously there lies a strategic dilemma, because it is not only the Russian oil, it is the overall strategic partnership, because try to understand, India and Russia have enjoyed a very long partnership right from the days of Soviet Union, and in the recent decades we have seen a much more growing bond between India and US as well. So it has a strategic dilemma at how to balance its bilateral partnership with Russia as well as at the same time US and such, and that is why there is a need of recalibration of choices in this regard. Now in the last, if we try to understand that what are the options India has going ahead from here. So first of all, obviously it will hope for a US-Russia deal, though no such deal has come into fruition in the recent Alaska summit. But obviously in the last, we talk about the press conference that took place in the summit, there has been an indication that again both presidents might meet in the near future soon, and even Vladimir Putin has hinted at hosting Donald Trump in the Moscow, the capital city of Russia itself, and it might help India in seeking total, we can say, the postponement of tariff, and at the same time diplomatic engagement becomes quite urgent, because it has to again engage with both partners, Russia as well as US, and also it has to review the crude import strategy, because recently again if you look at the scholars, they have pointed out that India has to carefully weigh the economic this losses that it will have to suffer because of additional tariff and the economic benefit it is getting due to the import of Russian oil, which is weighing higher. Based on that, India can take its decision and can reduce the oil flow from Russia itself. So overall, it is nothing but a balance that has to be carefully achieved between the economic interest, at the same time looking at the geopolitical landscape of the entire world, especially in the Trump era. That is all about this particular video. If you like the video, please hit the like button, share the flash prints, subscribe to the channel for more such content. Thank you very much.